Hello, everybody. Technology is great when it works, and man, when it doesn't work, it's crazy. For some reason, all of Facebook, Google, and everybody want to reset everything just as I'm getting the show live. So, my apologies for the delay in getting us started. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Lauren Gray, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, live show number 361. It is, when you simulcast, it is always a fun treat when all of a sudden channels have their issues. Thank you so much again for giving me a couple minutes to get this thing sorted out rather than not being able to simulcast. We'd like to bring up the topic today. As always, single topic discussion per week. And this one is how to create accurate demand forecasting. Sexy, right? Well, I'm doing this as a preclusion to the fact that we notoriously in the hospitality industry have a budget season. We actually have a season for this. And budgeting is a very arduous process. I think as I look at it from having done it so many times from property level, from corporate level, um, it's the fact that we have a change in guard, so to speak, and we have people that get into roles that they didn't have the year prior. And as such, the budgeting process is a learned experience. So just imagine, was it the movie 50 First Dates? You forget everything you did before and you have to do it again, which also breeds problems for our aspect. And that is um, a certain simplicity and repeatability and why reinvent the wheel and just recreate what we had. And that creates a very flat and plain marketing plan that goes towards budgets. If anybody's unfamiliar with the process of this, is when budget season starts in August, what you usually do at that point is you begin to aggregate the data of historical performances over your entire previous year span. You look at everything you did each month based on revenue sources and costs. I mean, budgets are budgets. There are also cost factors and line items associated with departmental cost, operational expenses, and so forth. I'm only dealing with the marketing component of top line revenue generation, the process of developing those numbers that literally dictate the ability for all the departments to spend that money in the most efficient way possible so that there is money left over for the ownership of investments. This line that gets to is called EBITDA, earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization. That line, everything below that is not something we can actually directly control per se. Um, so we're talking about top line revenue, our gathering sources of revenue from all the different places. So we look at our previous year's data. We look at our performances based on the simplistic segmentations of where did business come from into two basic categories: transient versus group. We then section those out on more fractional sections as to exactly types of transient business, and the types of group business: local negotiated rate, consortia, wholesalers, group, small group, room books versus if we have common areas to rent and so forth. We break this all down and begin the first acid test is it coming back? Now that more relates to group budgeting as to are these groups coming back? Let's hope that weddings don't come back. So a lot of the Smurf business isn't necessarily repeatability, and I say that with the caveat being that fraternal organizations and other association groups that do have annual gatherings may come back based on their choice options in your market or whether they have to rotate between markets. If you are the preferred hotel, like for instance, my high school alumni group persistently over the years uses one particular hotel in the city I went through school with as their place that they always have the reunion. It's familiar, it's common. They've developed a relationship with the hotel, which is to their benefit and to their credit. And so, because of that, all the reunions are gathered in that hotel on a persistent basis. That's more the exception than it is the norm. But these are the types of things that come up in your budget discussions. Excuse me while I drink some coffee since I was running around with the damn technology right this morning. So you begin to just put things on the board. Yeah, these things are going to happen again next year. Um, from a transient level, you look at the kind of Captain Obvious stuff. Are they repeatable events? Like, is this concert coming back next year? Is this holiday, which is an easy one, going to be at the same scope as it was last year? And that's the first time I get to say that because for years prior to COVID, the holiday was a holiday. Very, very rarely did anything in the destination market diminish in the support of that holiday. July 4th only got bigger. Um, Celebrations for Halloween only got bigger or they got more diverse. Um, Now, with what has happened with us during the COVID pandemic, that can't be said all the time. Sometimes these events are canceled. Sometimes these events. So now you have to look at the events next year and say, based on our experience from having gone through COVID and based on experience of how our market responded to COVID when there was certain threat levels, what's our confidence factor that these events would run as planned? And then go from there. And if not, what would they be reduced to if it was at a certain level, and what would it cause the cancellation? And that has to be in our budget dialogue because we have to have confidence in anticipated revenue, which is the exercise that you're going through. You're beginning to try to calculate estimated revenues for your next year. Now, this in high tech just recently, actually HSMAI, there was a wonderful discussion of the death of the marketing plan, and it was a fun ode. It was actually in the lightning round for HSMAI's market conference, marketing, yeah, marketing conference, I should say, and it was a fun storyline, pretty much, of the death of what marketing plans were, and it harkened to what marketing plans used to be. They used to be a big ring binder, and that ring binder had breakdowns as to what we were going to do each month to generate the business we anticipated getting that month, whether it was print media, whether it was radio media, whether it was flyers, whether it was whatever it was traditionally. That was in there. And we know the vendor we were going to be talking to, and we knew the budget we were willing to give them. That was our marketing plan. And it had a date stamp on the outside of the ring binder, and it sat up on the shelf. And maybe occasionally it was pulled down to see whether to make sure that all the boxes were checked. But that was pretty much the value proposition of a marketing plan. It was pretty much run the course, keep the steering wheel straight, and go down the middle of the road, and you're fine. That has long since gone and changed. Those days of that are no longer in existence for us. Not only from the circumstances of our society and the use of the internet, but also the upheavals and the changes and the difference in competition that we have now. We have much more intelligent competition. We have much more diverse competition. We have competition that isn't even in our market that we're competing with. So now it's about being able to understand where our market forces, our driving demands are at, and how we can identify them in such a way that we can calculate our anticipated cost to gather business from them to contribute to our top line revenue. So for that end, we've had a discussion 3 weeks ago with our trends discussion as to reading a map as to looking at pace. The conversation was all about the value of trends and pace compared to other forms of data, or ROI being particular to the show. And if you want to, it was a great conversation we had 3 shows back that talked a lot about what trend and pace were as a value proposition compared to the calculation of ROI, and how ROI can actually kill great ideas as used as the only metric for conversion value. So I want to go beyond the trends and pace because that is looking at relevant current data in the time frame of its impact. So here we are, a slice of time current now. That's what the trend and pace information is at. Okay. I want to go backwards in time as to being able to know where you would be at this moment of watching trends and pace. And that is looking at forecasting and demand to your market. And this is a historical step back. I've discussed in many presentations with traveling, oh gosh, 33 cities in the US alone and so forth when I was doing the road tour, as I call it. But we talked about these things, convergence of revenue management and marketing for HSMAI, Rocket Program, and in other conferences I've done in around the world, Australia, China. Anyway, is that there is a whole batch of data, massive data, well ahead of the more static data sources that are used to calculate what we're talking about for budgets. And what we use for calculating for budgets is pretty much result data, meaning this is what we charged when at this time. This is how many people stayed with us at that time. And this is how long they stayed with us at that time. Those 3 points of data, ADR, length of stay, and occupancy, are the fundamental components of revenue management forecasting. They look at what we have done historically in anticipation of its reflection in future context. That is a lot of the ways that budgets have been done over the years, continue to be done over the years. And it's not that it's not viable, it is just fractional to the total value of what you should be looking at. In my discussions and conferences that I've done, I talk about the marketing data component that augments and actually gives a better story beyond the factual 3 points of data, occupancy, length of stay, and ADR, by talking about the interest and the life cycle of people's discovery, education, and then acquisition. Because truly, the only real revenue management data of those 3 points that are about are acquisition. It's the this is the result of everything because those numbers we have. We have who stayed, we have how long they stayed, and we have how much they paid. And then we have all this other data about where they came from and so forth that helps with the feeder market discussions. And I'm being very simplistic with revenue management when I say that they only look at these 3 items. These are the key 3 items. They certainly look at other data points, but usually to reaffirm a conclusion that they've already derived from the original core 3 data points. It's kind of I believe there's 2 people in the world: the people that um, look for something that justifies their opinion, and then there's the people that look for everything that would not justify their opinion. And if at the end it still holds true, it must be the right thing to do. I think a lot of times revenue management falls into the first category, and that is this is what we believe because we have historical data to think that this is going to happen again. So now let's look at all the factors that support that argument so that that is our discussion points, ignoring anything that would create any sort of disruption to that, like a pandemic response, like a change in demand, like the issues of inflation and cost of fuel and cost of flights and inability to travel and what have you. Those variables aren't in that equation that I just discussed into the modality of creating a forecasted budget. Forecast is the desire to anticipate, okay, what we will be doing in the future, how we will be performing in the future. And this key discussion point of today is how we are going to be performing in top line revenue in the future. Now, marketing can contribute a lot to the anticipation of what that is, but it doesn't give the full answer. It's like an indicator of saying, yes, this the cloud is over there to the west, and so that means most likely that's where the rain will begin. Doesn't mean it's going to rain, doesn't mean it's going to come to us. But if it is going to do either of those 2 things, that's most likely where it's going to come from because it's already building. That is what marketing can do. Marketing can share that information. Now, with that, there is other data beyond that. Let's first clarify that the hard data is the results of actual production, which is, again, the occupancy, length of stay, and ADRs. There's other aspects of that data, which is the booking window, the time that they book prior to their arrival, that window, okay, that prime booking window, okay, rate sensitivity, feeder markets, geographies of where the people came from, how, if we have any understanding of how they came through, is there correlations between flight lift versus drive market? How far did they travel from to know whether or not they actually flew? Usually, people fly when they're going over 350 miles away from their destination. Usually. We know that that's not necessarily true now, given the flight costs and fuel costs, but fuel being probably a cheaper alternative in some circumstances, and the travel stories that we heard now already, that people are driving to somehow make sure that they get to where they want to go. So it's changed the dynamics of how these people may be coming to us. Also, too, and this is an old internet analogy that's been going on now for 20 plus years, is the internet has broadened up everyone's perspective of what is available. One of the core values of what brand used to provide was commonality, homogeneity, and consistency. If you went into a Holiday Inn or Howard Johnson's when the first brands were rolled out, you knew you were going to get a certain level of quality. Unlike you going to a mom and pop or a non-branded hotel, an uncertainty factor existed. You didn't know if you were going to get a super comfy room. You didn't know if the room was going to be big. You didn't know if it had an ice machine. Blah 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 blah, blah on and on and on. So that uncertainty lent it that if you wanted those things, you would go to a brand hotel. That was their value proposition that they were providing. Consistency. Also, because of their multiplicities, a market name. If that brand was above your hotel and people appreciated the quality of what that brand represented, they were going to stay at your hotel. It was a strong investment to those people that spent the money to build the brick and mortar. The internet has changed that. There's a lot of absolutely amazing independent hotels that are not under a brand flag, and it's soft brands as well, that offer a variety of services, but the internet has allowed us to discover those things. And so for that reason, brands' value has changed. Their big core values, they bring their entire tech stack and platform of support to investors that build brick and mortar buildings that aren't there to run it. They are there to as an investment to get a return on their investment. So brand represents a very strong value proposition. And it also helps them in their financing. Banks are more likely to lend money to a brand build hotel than they are to go over and lend money to an independent hotel that doesn't have a track record of success. It's a risk factor ratio for banks that have to deal with. So because of that, when we do budgeting and forecast, we have to understand all the impacts of the demand to our market. Now, we know that this past year has been a roller coaster. The past year before that has been a roller coaster. The year before that was the last normal year when it came to demand anticipation. For that reason, and on this show, we've talked many times about creating an average weighted mean data set. And what this is creating a benchmark, a stick in the sand that basically says, is it going to be at, above, or below this marker? That's it. It's not to say an indication of what it's anticipated in doing. It's a number to more accurately reflect the historical data that you're using. And what do I mean by this? So 2019 was the last regular business cycle demand to market data we had. These people stayed without the threat of pandemic. These people came to us because it was that time of year. These people came because of this particular event. So it's a nice little historical reference point. But in of itself, it's not good. So if you're doing budgeting for 2023, thinking that it's going to be an old 2019 again, you're going to be wrong. Just flat out at this moment, I'm going to tell you that you're going to be wrong. As wrong as you would be as if you took only 2020 and compared to what you think you're going to do in 2023. Because 2020, we had the lockdowns, we had the shutdowns. There was nobody could go anywhere for anything because there was legalities involved. There was municipalities that were shutting down restaurants, municipalities that were shutting down the hotel capability of having arrivals, or the requirement to travel was very, very limited. Okay. Then you had 2021 where we had the tsunami of summer. Where everybody that was penned up got the chance to go out, and then we had the surge of Omicron after that. But it was an incredible time. We had not near the staff we needed to supply service. We had reduced amenities, if no amenities at all, but we were charging back of the door rates to anybody that walked in the door, and they were willing to pay because they were so desperate to get out of their house that they were not allowed to do for the year previous. So taking 2021 is not going to be a great example of data. So you say, well, 2022, year over year, we've had a somewhat normal 2021 in some aspects, but we haven't. But if you want to just glaze over it, it's more normal than it has been in the past 2 years. So year over year should be a good calculation. It's not, because demand cycle's been different. We've had artificial demands because of international markets being restricted and or not available and or their ability to travel. We've had a change in the amount of inventory in market. So if before you had 1,000 rooms in your market and now you only had 600 rooms, you're skewed as to your total contribution of your inventory compared to overall inventory. Constrained demand, unconstrained demand. Okay. And so it has an artificial impact on your ability to charge rates. So even if you look at this year to next year as a comparison, it in itself is not accurate. So you need to create an average weighted mean. You take numbers from 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, up to date, year to date, and you weight an average mean, meaning based on the amount of business of each of them, weighs their value in the accumulation of creating an average weighted mean. That's what it is. And if you're not familiar with math, it's not overly complex, easy to find. Google it. You can see how to create an average weighted mean number. But what this does is creates a benchmark number based on putting all this data together and weighing the data of each year to its value contribution to the overall number, gives you an average weighted mean. This is a nice marker. This is not a forecast marker. This is a nice marker to stick in the sand and say, here's the average value proposition of this information over a spectrum of time that we can use to establish our anticipations in our forecasting for 2023. Do we feel we're going to be the same as this number, above this number, or below this number? It's a reference point. If anybody's a geek like me on the space stuff, Voyager, one of the reasons they've had to shut down or plan on shutting down completely the satellites, which are farthest thing that man has ever created out of our solar system, is that the satellites are unable to identify their relevant location, their marker. They have no reference point of where they are compared to someplace that they know. And so because of that, they can't be communicated with effectively because we can't know where they are supposed to line up to talk to us. And we can't line up where we're supposed to send information to them because we don't know where they are, because they can't tell us where they are, and they can't send back to us because they don't know where they are to send it from that point of reference. That's how important markers are. And we need to have a marker when it comes to what we do for our anticipation of revenue, top line revenue. So we've created this marker, average weighted mean. We have a marker. We have markers based on our segmentations, overall gross business, and we can segment it down, doing the same method for the same important. To keep it simple, I would say don't go really farther than the split between transient and group. Really, you're looking at determining the overall contribution value of group as it relates to your transient. Each property has its own group value. Obviously, hotels that are built for group business that have a lot of common space and they really try to drive that. Destination markets that have a lot of Smurf markets that they do that with, it'll have a higher priority. And you might want to segment down to some of those things, Smurf versus anything else. So you have some contribution percentage of what those are. But then you break those down. So now you have what we call the fundamentals of marketing for budgeting for you're rolling into August with. You have your markers, you have your relative values, you have excuse me, my apologies for coughing. You have some referencing points. Now you need to look at the commonalities of consistency. Now that you've done that and you understand your historical numbers, look at your anticipated numbers, which is look at the soft, easy stuff. What are the things that drive business for us? You go into holidays, okay, mark them down because you know they're going to have an impact on your business. Okay, good or bad. I mean, it was funny when I moved from Florida to Texas. We did this during the springtime, or actually fall, but we were in spring when we were looking at houses, and we were surprised that some restaurants were so quiet. And they said, "Well, it's spring break." Our mindset is when coming from Florida, spring break is packed and stacked. It's the time that you don't tend to do stuff as a local tourist because there's so many people who are during they came down just for that purpose. Texas is where they come from, one of them. So spring break is actually a slow period for them. It was really a weird mind shift to go in the opposite of what we're so used to when it comes to spring break. But most holidays have an impact, usually positive to your business, demand to market. From that, you build out to other events, things that are like this is a event that always happens in our market. It draws a lot of great people. Those things are there. Okay. Now, I want to pause for just a moment. You should have that both historical data as to what events have happened, but also you should have a resource to know what events are planned for because not all of them live long enough. The reason why there's the third annual versus the new concert is because the third annual didn't last and didn't go to the fourth, and there's a new concert that's taking this time slot kind of thing. So there's always transitions of these events that you should be aware of. You should not be surprised in your market if there's something planned. What you might also not realize is that there's some things that happen in your market that are not broadcasted well enough to know that they are potentially impactful. To that end, I got to share a neat platform that I've just started messing with. That I'll talk a little bit about how I'll do it in just a minute, but the neat impact of this is it's called predicthq.com. Now it's not the only platform. Okay, let me be clear. This is not the only place that's doing this, but it is a neat research platform. There's other platforms that will actually share event information that you could use in an API, okay, interface that you can contribute to your content. So you have dynamic content on the events that are coming up. And we talk about that from a geek side, but this one is about picking a location, picking a radius from that location, and it cumulatively telling you all the things that are happening in that area and relative scores as to its impact on the categorization of people flying in versus local demand versus exterior market demand. And it gives market indicators. This is going to have a stronger impact than this. This is going to have no impact compared to this. This is going to have a whole ton of impact on this market. And what it does is it gives you reference point. I've tried this several ways, and I don't go back into the history of Bones in the Closet for where we try to add event information to pre-arrival stuff and the dynamic content. And there's platforms now out there that do a great job of that, by the way. They're not cheap, but they do a great job if that's a value contribution you want to put into your pre-arrival stuff. But the idea that you can look at all the things that are going to impact your market rather than guessing, and I've done the guessing game. I've had markets where we've looked through the inventory, we looked at the Chamber of Commerce, looked at the CVB, the TDCs, got their list of everything, looked at it and said, okay, well, that's going to happen at that conference center. That's going to happen at that stadium. That's going to happen in that park. When things happen in that park, historically, that doesn't affect us too much. We're too far away from it. When it happens at that conference center, we get some of it, but usually the hotels that are connected to the conference center eat up most of the lion's share, and there's very little citywides and so forth for it. So we don't do anything with that. That's how we've been henpecking, throwing darts at a board to determine the impact value to our hotel to determine whether we should price ourselves accordingly, like increase our prices because the demand will be going up, or lower prices because we're not going to get the demand and we want to catch anything that falls off like elsewhere, whatever. So, because of that, these kind of programs like Predict.HQ can give you a stick in the sand as to the relevant impact that they see based on the attendance numbers that are going to be related to that event, historical and or contributed. And from that, the impact value to it, plus it gives you a lot of information about it. The value to that from a marketing perspective is golden. And we're not there to delve on this today. Today is talking about accurate demand forecasting. We're going to talk about the value of having that type of information in your forecasting. So here we are in July. We're talking about laying groundwork for our August budget season. And we've broken down, as I said, average weighted mean benchmark for our historical data. We've easily put in the pins in the map as to, or into the calendar as to our event impacts and our holiday impacts. Those are the easy givens. Okay. We're going to slide group off to the side right now because that's a much more intricate conversation about demand return values. And that goes into contract values, LNRs, local negotiated rate contracts, your wholesale rates. We'll just leave that over there for right now. We're just doing a transient right now. So transient, we're looking at other things we don't know. And this Predict HQ is a great example of things we don't know. We may know some of them, of course, but now we're looking at some numbers of relevant value impact to our market. Now we can assess whether or not these things are worthy of the strategy of budget, meaning will they be able to make a positive impact on our top line cash flow? Cash flow is not an accurate term, really, but top line revenue. Cash flow is a different functionality, and I don't want to be too granular, but don't want to mess up the terms either. So here you have now additional event information, and you can assess whether or not that there's a value proposition to those and say we should raise our rates for that. And we should parameter that to being here and there. So we know that we're going to raise our rates this much compared to our normal ADR for that month. And we create highlight markers for that so that we put that into our budgeting process. Okay. We're looking at the fact that now we have other event driven things that will cause rate changes. Obviously, there's other things that we have to discuss in this calculation of transient revenue impact, top line revenue impact, and that is business cycle. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, like spring break and the comparison of it, spring break is a business cycle. Wintertime, if you're in a snow area, is a business cycle. Summer is a business cycle. Fall, all of these have different impacts to your market. So, with that, you determine your rate strategies by season. It's actually the oldest method of hotel rate calculation in existence. Um, Back in the day, well before the internet, you had rate cards. This is our rate for this season, that season, and this season. Um, and it was what you shared with people when they asked you to mail them information, and or they were there at your hotel and they wanted to come back. You gave them next year's rate card. Showing my age, I think. Anyways, well, more than the beard. You have these breakdowns now of your event driven, your business cycles, your benchmarking of historical data. Now, how do you begin to look at more demand factors to this? Now, remember, we're talking about August discussions. We're not putting hard numbers yet on what we think all this is going to produce. We're looking at all the things that influence the potential of production of revenue. Okay. We're just putting all the stuff on a big old board of these are all the things that we should be looking at that will impact our total top line, in this case, transient level revenue generation. Okay. And so for that reason, we have to look at other sources of things. This now crosses over to a little bit of the revenue management data because this is not so much revenue managers data in itself as it is property level data that you can rely upon. And that is feeder market calculations. What you do is you take your entire background of people that stayed with you over the course of the year, break it up by either the season, which is probably the next easiest step, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter kind of stuff. And to be more granular, because there's not everything nice and clean between one quarter to the next. Sometimes there's bleed over like spring break, bleed over like summer, bleed over like, anyway, you get the idea, holidays, is break it down as to the markets, the geographic location that people came from in a descending list, force rank the top 10. Okay. Anything below, and anything that shows 80% of the contribution. Okay. Usually it's within the top 5 to 7, but it's top 10 to make sure that you get a full rounded number list for that. Okay. By doing that, then you have where geographically they're coming from. Okay, these are the feeder markets. Right off the bat, by looking at your feeder market, you're going to know whether they flew or drove. Okay, if you're in Los Angeles and this market is a feeder market of yours and it's from New York, they flew. By the same token, if they're 150 miles away and they came in, they drove. There is Captain Obvious moments, and there's also the fuzzies. I don't know. It's far enough that I would fly, but maybe they drove, depending upon which city they came from. Now, one of the ghosts of the machine about this is their geographic location doesn't necessarily denote how they got to you. Like it did, they go through Atlanta as a hub of an airport compared to Chicago. You really have to look at where they live, their residence, and that comes on their guest folios. Here's where some problems get created. Brand doesn't offer this data. So if you haven't been gathering this data in perpetuity, you don't have as much diversity of this data as would be helpful. Brand doesn't allow you to really pull that kind of data per se. If you squeak a wheel long enough, it will give you some data because they have that data. They have that ability to give you that sourcing of data. They just don't do it willingly. So I would highly recommend to start badgering them now to get that kind of data. Where did everybody come from and when? That data, the more granular you get it, the more flexible it is useful. Okay. Because if you can have it where they just give you the raw data, these are the places they came from and where they stayed, that's golden data. That data can create amazing accuracy on the value proposition of feeder markets and their contribution value. Let's be general and just say that you get some general idea of the geographic sources of business. Okay. Now, with the feeder markets and the correlation of when they come to your market, you have a sense now of where you get your business. Now, why is that useful for budgeting? It's useful to budgeting after you give it back to marketers because you're going to go to the marketers and say, hey guys, here's our historical geographic data of where people came from at what time of the year. I need to know how that is reflected in the data that you have. Now, marketers have website information. And again, skipping the brain conversation again, go the same way route I just described, is going to your marketing data, looking at your website traffic, correlate this geographic information with traffic information to your website. Look at those sections of time, block it out into quarters because it's easy to do bulker numbers first, and see when did the people in this market start looking at you, traffic wise, okay, prior to their known arrival, which is what the data you just were given. This creates a lead time that is different than your booking window time. It crosses over, but there you'll find very quickly there's a lot of early traffic out here in the discovery zone. They discovered you were in the market. Now, the discovery zone for people, and we've talked about this several times, the discovery market is when people saying, I want to go on a trip. They may not know where they want to go. They may not know what they want to do, where they want to go. They certainly don't have any questions about where they're going to stay or how they're going to get there yet. They just don't even know really where they're going to go. So they begin to discover stuff. Okay. I might want to go to the mountains. I might want to go to the beach. I might want to do whatever. And they begin to look around for stuff. Okay. Now, a lot of vendors don't advertise in this space. No, OTAs will because they're going to try to guide you to interest, but that's another conversation we've had. But for right now, it's a lot of what if. So there's not a ROI to this. Okay. And we had that discussion 3 weeks ago, as I mentioned. But in this discovery zone, we can see that in traffic because what they'll do is when they're thinking, hey, I like your destination. And they might look and then they want to feel for, well, is this a really expensive place to go to? They might hit your hotel site. Also, because your hotel website might have great content about the destination, it might have shown up in the answer box. It might have shown up in their queries. And they might have actually gone through your website to get information about your market. That wasn't because they went to you because of your hotel. They went to you because, as an authority, your hotel had good data, which is a whole SEO discussion we've had on other shows. So they come through that process. That data is useful because in the budgeting process that where this is all focused on, one is how do we get the data, the revenue from these sources again? Was it incidental? Was it perpetual? Did it have a history going back to your benchmark? Is this something that happens a lot? Is that relevant to our benchmarks of weighted mean average data? But also, is it something that we can repeat? Which is the first question on all of this stuff when it comes to budgeting for the next year. Is this a repeatable revenue source? So if we can identify when they were looking at us and the aptitude of whether they're going to come to us again, then we can determine that that is a viable, repeatable source of revenue. Cool. That's in the green column, so to speak. Now, the question to marketers for the budgeting process is, can you expand on that? And that's where the marketers can go now and look at what they spent in that market. Now, this is where it comes and deals with your analytics as well. If you can grab your analytics and determine by proper goal setting and event setting where they came from, when did they first look, what did they look at, when did they come back, that kind of data. You can put that into data platforms that you can create a lead time understanding. Picture this just as an example, and I've used this example many times. So, for those that have heard it before, just know that this is where it applies as well. And that is, if you're tracking the dates that people are interested in your date box for your booking engine, and you're taking that data, you're taking the geographic reference of where they are at when they're looking for this, the dates that they're looking for in this. And if you take that data, okay, you can create a nice chart, a nice map, and whatever else that says, based on the dates that you're selected that you're interested in, the geographic source of demand. Where in the world were people looking from to stay with you during then? And if you do that, you have a marketing source, because then the marketers take the data and say, how much of what we spent generated revenue from there? What did we spend on cost per click? What did we spend on what channel? Was it social? Was it paid? Was it paid social? Um, was it other means that we got in front of them, display ads, whatever? And we saw the conversion value. Like, okay, well, that market responded very well to paid ads, Google paid ads, and our CPC was X, and our conversion was Y, and so forth. And they can actually calculate how much they would have to spend in that market for that window of discovery that we've determined from the traffic from the website, to know what they would have to spend to get them back again, and potentially expand the value of that market by spending more money next time to get more people interested in coming. Okay, because there is ways of calculating total traffic, total voice, compared to total exposure versus your actual cost of what you got for percentage of voice. And this goes back to one of our other shows, and we'll bring it up in another show too, of calculating the difference between total audience, displayed audience, your exposure to that audience. It's a descending funnel. And that math calculation of how to rise up in that funnel doesn't have to do with ROI, as it has to do with value of conversion. Another discussion. Going back to our budget discussion for calculating the demand to a budget. These are the things that determine confidence factors. How confident are we that we can not only recapture that market now that we've identified it much clearer as to geographic source and demand from there? Okay. But more importantly, how much more valuable could it be if we were to exercise that newfound knowledge in targeting it more? When you do that, you get the ability to now determine on your budget total top line revenue contributions based on new demand understandings. Okay. So there's a lot of other resources you can use to determine demand metrics. A lot of it has to do with the sources you're using primarily for your paid campaigns. There's a lot of data in your paid campaign programs that can be used to extrapolate demand. Okay. Not just this is what we spent for ads, this is how many people clicked on our ads, and these is how many people bought the ads. Those are fundamental numbers. It's more about how many people potentially could have seen our ad, how many people were exposed to our ad, how many people acted on our ad, and how many people did we, from the result of that, actually generate. So you're expanding at one level more. That can come from your meta search platforms as to not only how many people should have seen your ad but didn't, how many people did see your ad based on your budget, and how many people acted on your ad, which was your clicks, but also what device were they on? What was their booking demand? Was it they were looking for a one night stay, two night stay, three night stay, four night stay? That demand impact metric as to what they were looking and booking for can also determine your revenue calculations for your forecasting budget. Okay. Because forecasting and budget are in combination with each other now. Forecast is the short term window of applicability of determining what's going to happen next. But budgets are the long term strategy of what you anticipate based on this type of research. Looking at it more from not the reactionary forecast of pace and trend, but rather on the forecast about the ability to forecast based on demand and interest, the cycle of that. And that's where budgeting comes in. Budgeting is used as a tool not just to go back and see how much funding you can get to go over and pay for your department. Budgeting is also based on how much you anticipate generating revenue, calculating on these types of fundamental values. What is the demand from a market? Is it something we can recapture, or can we exploit? Or is that a diminishing value? We didn't talk about the negative of that. The negative of it is that happened once because of. not because we can get it back again. It happened because we had the Super Bowl in our market and it's not coming back next year. So that's an easy one to say. We're not going to probably do that again. Those kind of Captain Obvious ones don't come often, but a lot of times it's by critical thinking that says, well, that pent up demand in the summer of 2021 was a once level event. That was like a Super Bowl for 3 months for some people. Okay. The likelihood of that demand being as much as it was again, probably not. The fact that we could charge as much as we did then, probably not. So that's a realistic assessment. Again, we balanced all that out with the average weighted mean numbers, but now it's about determining how we can determine the demand to our market. Now, some of these things are based on how well you create ad campaigns. What I mean by this, and I'm going to go back to the brand people for right now. If you're doing paid ad campaigns, okay, meta search is one of those ones you can get some information from. Social is where you get the most information from. You can determine how people are engaging, how they're engaging to your paid social campaigns better than you can your organic. Insights give you some things, but paid campaigns give you more things. If you're looking at your paid ad campaigns and you're starting from a zero option that you don't know what they're doing, and let's say for instance you're doing paid ad campaigns for a branded hotel, you don't get your actual organic statistics for your website because your website's sitting under a mothership website that they give you general static information. But if you run paid ad campaigns, you can see who interacted with your ad campaign. More importantly, you can isolate those people that interacted with your ad campaign, whether they converted or not, which you don't know because you don't have that data from the brand. But you do know that they interacted with your ad. And that group of audience that comes from the interaction of your ad can be retargeted to see if it was just general interest or specific conversion. And that retargeting gives you a sounding board as to the value proposition of what they represent for marketing. So if you have historically done ad campaigns and you have done retargeting, you have a cleaner insight on the repeatability or value proposition of the people that were engaged with why you ran that ad campaign. Was it event driven, business cycle, whatever, to know whether or not you can derive a stronger result with a bigger budget by pushing on that same kind of segmentation that you created your ad campaign for. That makes a very big difference in the world of how you determine your budget, how you determine your demand. Now, there are some other fun tools to just generally look at demand, things like Google Trends, which is a free platform, just to see in general. You can get somewhat granular with it, but you can't get as granular as you would like because obviously the more long the discovery, the number of words in the discovery for a trend for it, the smaller the audience is as to whether there's even data to track that people were searching for that. Basically, Google Trends, in a nutshell, is a platform that you put a search term in and it'll break down the historical demand for that search term and the geographic reference of where people were by country. And then you go into the country and you can go down to the states. You go into the state, you can go into some of the smaller components, but that's about as far as it goes. Where you can see that people were looking for your market, perhaps. You can also do comparisons of people looking for your market versus another person's market. If you're looking for people looking for your hotel, that data is too small for them to show sometimes the relevancy of the search for you. But if you look in very general ways of seeing how many people at what time of year are looking for your market, it's a great, again, stick in the sand to determine whether or not that validates your historical data that, yeah, that's true. Most people do look for us during that time. It can be, again, a Captain Obvious thing, but that verification and validation helps in your discussions when you go to the budget review as to why you have confidence in the revenue numbers that you're proposing, because you have this type of depth of data that compares and validates itself, saying, hey, look, we have this historical data that says the demand is at that time. We also have trend data that shows that demand is at that time. And then we also have information that things are going to be happening in that time that we have confidence that we can raise our rates on because we know that they're going to be happening in market. So we have confidence that the revenue that we're proposing for that time segment has validation to be in confidence that it will work. That is the big argument about how budgets get approved, because the one line that can't be crossed is the cross where it says we're not making money. Whenever you go to a budget review, and I've sat on both sides of the table and multiple chairs on either side, And the boil down of it is great intents don't pay checks, and great intents don't go to the bank. So optimism and opinion don't validate budgets and forecasts. So you have to have substantive data to validate why you're proposing something is something. And the answer of, well, we did it last year, we did the year before, doesn't measure anymore. You look at the fact that if you were relying upon summer 2021 as a reference point of how much you could do business, you're wrong, because it was an artificial environment that you did the business in. By the same token, if you look at 2022 or 2020, you wouldn't be able to validate we're better than that year. Well, anybody's better than that year because nobody was allowed to do business that year. So using bad reference points for content doesn't help in your demand forecasting. Demand forecasting is based on established numbers that make sense to people. Average weighted mean numbers over a spectrum of years is a number that people can agree upon. It doesn't skew one way or another. It blends that out in a value that is related to the contribution of data. Looking at your feeder markets and where you get business from and validating that that interest is still there, and being able to say that you can identify them and maybe perhaps expand on the value proposition of the market, then you can validate why you think you can generate that revenue. Because at the end of every budget discussion, it's contingent upon top line revenue. You can't squeeze there was a blood out of a turnip or water out of a rock or whatever, if it's not there. If you don't have the revenue, the best calculated budget doesn't work because you don't have the money to pay for what the expenses are. You need to first accurately calculate your top line revenues before any of the budgeting forecasting and stuff comes on. So the more you can determine accurate demand forecasting, not based on static historical performance alone, but rather in combination with other sources of data that create confidence factors on the anticipated revenue you can generate by rate, by occupancy, by demand, whatever those things are. But the more you can validate those positions, the more likely you're going to get your budget approved because you can validate the most key component to your budget, and that is anticipated revenue. Why can I prove that I am going to get this top line revenue? Because revenue heals a multitude of sins. If the money is flowing, there's a lot more tolerance for variations, expenses, other things that normally wouldn't get paid for because the money's there. It's possible to be done for, whatever have you. Those things are the things that drive the decisions for budgets. It is the linchpin to it. And I've been in plenty of times where budgets were brought down to the absolute existence of the hotel, but the key element was whether did they have the revenue to even pay the bills that they're budgeting for. And that's where you lost team members. That's where you lost budgets for marketing. That's where you lost budgets for operations. That's where you shut down parts of the hotel because the revenue wasn't there for it. So that is the key elements to it. I wanted to keep this within our hour. I think we're doing well for it in that sense of it. I don't want to go beat the bush too much for this, but there's some other things that I would like to point out that there's sources of data that you probably don't use very often, but are very valuable in this calculation of demand. One of the ones that's often overlooked is things like Google My Business. One aspect about Google My Business is it gives great searchability. And Google My Business is something that any property, branded or not, can look at and see the people that are looking for your hotel, asking directions for your hotel. And just recently, Google in their last conference expanded the fact that people can review beyond, you can respond to reviews now in Google My Business. So you can create that as an active dialogue. People could make comments about you, but you couldn't interact with them. Now you can actually interact with them. So you have a whole value proposition of Google My Business. And why is Google My Business so important? It's what drives what people see on their mobile phones. Your information about your hotel, your proximity to of things that you can't control, but because Google knows exactly where you are and they know exactly what's around you, they can say this hotel has a high rating because you're right around the corner from a certain location, has a low rating because you're too far away from another one. So it creates a validity of truth to the data that is being presented for you. Your reviews, which are key components to your success of people, it has been constantly reiterated that people use reviews as a benchmark of whether or not they're affirming their purchase or confirming that they're not purchasing because of the reviews that are created. So they're very important for that. Other platforms that, well, Google owns this one, but it's very interesting because you can advertise them, is like Waze. If you ran ads in Waze, which is basically a map that it's like Google Map and so forth, but it's a community map in the sense people can let you know when the traffic is slowing down or so forth. But you can put ads in for your business. So as people are driving and they're using Waze, they can see your hotel is off to the side or your restaurant is off to the side, and they can just tap it and get directions to it, tap it and get more information for you. Waze is a great source of data to determine how many people were looking at you, how many people look for directions for you. Great stuff for that. There's also a lot of uh, public data, like traffic data to your market, where people tend to drive into town from most. What is the traffic flow? You might find yourself here on a dead corner. You may have realized that just by sheer metrics of observing, like, people don't drive in front of you as much as they drive around you. But knowing how they come in also can help you derive, especially for larger metros, which direction for feeder markets are more likely to be of interest. Because people, when they come into a city, just think of your own human nature. They're less likely to drive into the city the farthest away from the place that they're going to be coming and staying, unless they're driving through to get to the place that they want to be at, in the destination that you represent is the strongest one. Most often, out of convenience or familiarity, they look at how they're coming into the city and they look for your relevance to that. So that can be helpful. Census data is golden. Um, Incomes by zip code, groups, types, and travels, and so forth. Very powerful. There's also a great spreadsheet, and I'll put the link into the show notes. New York Times did this, and that is Facebook traffic from region to region. What they showed, and it's been incredibly helpful, just as a reference point, not because of numbers, but a reference point. Think about the fact that when people have their kids go to college, they're going from where they live to where they're going to college. In a Facebook world, that means the communication to and from those locations increase, because the family talks to the child talks to the family. The connection on Facebook is strong between those two places. Same too when families relocate. They talk to their family from where they came from, or from where they went to. Those connections are strong and solid. When family members travel distances and go to work in some other location. Why is that important? Because if they are talking between those two locations and you're one of those two locations, then you know that these people might be coming back to the location and or leaving from their location, or having people visit them in the location. That means that there's demand for that geographic market to you, because there's a connection of people in your market to another market. So this incredible data, that just, as I said, is a reference point for it. That goes from relocations, colleges, sports travel. The fact that you have teams that travel, that is a huge thing. If you see people coming from a market to your market because a team's traveling, that's an easy feeder market. If a team's coming from market X and you're in market Y, why not market to market X about the fact that the sporting event is happening in your market and they should book their hotels? Those are feeder market distribution ideas. Those are the things that you need to look at. Obviously, kind of going back to the old ways of saying things, is all of your old static data is very important. And that is looking at your occupancy, ADR, length of stays, and so forth, but also look at your booking windows, your discovery windows, also the pace of interest as to when it builds and how it does. If there are they coming in 30 days out, and you can look at this on platforms like your metasearch and so forth, that you see that they're booking 30 days out compared to one day night only, or within 2 day nights only, or 2 nights only, or things like this. This comparative data is really malleable. You can compare it to several things and see whether or not it matches how people's interest in your market are occurring. So there you have it. Those are lots of tools to use to calculate demand marketing. Lots of ways to make sure demand is part of your process for creating budgets for 2023. And it is a fundamental tool to begin in the process of creating top line revenue calculations, which is literally the juxtaposition of the success of your budget program. So there you have it. Thank you so much for your time, your patience, and our weird start this morning. And as always, my name is Lon Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time and look forward to talking to you all next week.
A team in the Asian culture at a hotel, from whoever you connect with. And Dean, I've talked about when we stayed at hotels in China and stuff. Mm-hmm. When you talk to anybody in that organization, you might as well be talking to the CEO of it, because even though they recognize tiers and responsibilities